I'm Dr. Yvonne Cason, President of Spiritual Awakenings International. Welcome to day 2 of our Spiritual Awakenings International Conference 2022. It is now my great pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Dr. Peter Fenech. Dr. Fenech has been a groundbreaker, a true pioneer, raising awareness about end-of-life experiences and near-death experiences in the UK since the 1980s. Spiritual Awakenings International has recognized Dr. Peter Fenech for his outstanding pioneering work as an honoree on the Spiritual Awakenings International Circle of Honor. Congratulations, Dr. Fenech.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you very much.
Dr. Peter Fenech is an internationally renowned British neuropsychiatrist, researcher, and author. Dr. Fenech was the first UK scientist to talk on television about near-death experiences in 1982. He has carried out research in hospices and nursing homes in the UK and in Holland, looking at the experiences reported by the dying and their caregivers around the time of death, and the importance of spiritual support in palliative care. He has published 5 books and many research papers related to altered states of consciousness, near-death experiences, and end-of-life experiences. He has also researched meditation and studied the EEG of a meditating beetle you might have heard of, George Harrison. Please welcome Dr. Peter Fenech.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. That was a lovely introduction. Yes, you're quite right. We did do George Harrison's EEG. In fact, we were looking for money, as one does. And so we wrote to Apple, and we got a letter back from George Harrison saying, yes, he'd like to come down and see what it was like. So the porter in the Maudsley Hospital where I was rang me up and said, there's a very funnily dressed gentleman here. Do you want to see him? And I said, yes, of course. And so George came along. We put all the electrodes on, and he's getting a bit bored by this time. But we put him in the observation room and started recording, and we got some nice meditation recordings. And then our beetle fell into sleep. Now, what on earth do you do if your beetle next door is asleep? So we thought he'd probably tired guy. So we left him there for a bit and then woke him up and said, hi, George, how was that? He said, wonderful, wonderful. I feel very rested. We said, did you think that you might have fallen asleep? He said, absolutely not. It's all meditation. So there you go. So thanks very much. So today, what I would like to do, if I may, and I'm just going to screen share with you. So it's shining light on transcendence. And the important thing is that well, first of all, what is transcendence? It's a non-spiritual state. And why do we need to shine light on it? Because very little is known. Plan for my talk is going to be existential death anxiety, new information about death as an expansion of consciousness. Now, you didn't miss here. New information about death is an expansion of consciousness and an understanding of the transcendent states which accompany it. And then similarity between death and NDEs. Well, that's where we are, and that's what we see out of our window. Wonderful, isn't it? But this is all going to stop. And it's going to go black for you all. You will die, whether you like it or not. So be careful and be prepared for it. And I do mean you. Now, I set up those slides because I'm raising within you your feelings of existential death anxiety. And let's just see how that can change our behavior. So this is the role of death in light, really. And this book, which I've shown you there, Worm at the Core, is certainly worth getting because it's an excellent book on existential death anxiety by Sheldon Solomon and two other authors. They worked with it and they did a number of experiments. See what you feel about this for the experiments. Two groups were formed and selected by questionnaire to be the same in personality. They were all judges, note. One half were given just the questionnaire, and the other had an additional question. How long do you think you will live? So they're pretty similar, just one extra question. Both groups were asked to judge a minor crime, a prostitute found working the streets. The average fine for that crime at the time was £50. That was the baseline. In the first group, where the judges were not asked to think about their mortality, as you would expect, they set an average fine of £50. Now, there's only just the difference between these groups is just that one question: how long are you going to live? But the group who had been asked about their mortality first set a bond that was 9 times higher, £450. And what's amazing are two things. One is that judges are supposedly trained to administer the law evenly and rationally. So for heaven's sake, if you go into a court, don't threaten your judge with death, as he won't behave like that. And secondly, when the experiment was explained to them, the second group all said, no way your stupid little questionnaire could have had any effect on my behavior. It's there behind our behavior the whole time. Whenever people are reminded of death, they love people who share their beliefs. They hate people who are different. You might actually think there's a lot of death about now. So see if you recognize these. They sit closer to people who share their beliefs. They sit further away from anyone who looks different. And if we give such people in a laboratory setting an opportunity to physically harm someone who's different, they become much more hostile and vicious. And they choose, note, charismatic leaders. And I suggest that this can be seen in our present society simply because we're all being made aware of death. Is there a way around this? Well, yes, there is. I don't know how many of you have been to Bhutan, lovely Himalayan kingdom. And unlike many of us in the West, the Bhutanese don't sequester death. Death and images of death are everywhere, especially in Buddhist iconography, where you'll find colorful, gruesome illustrations. No one, not even children, are sheltered from these images or from ritual dancers reenacting death. And they say in Bhutan that if you have 5 reminders a day about this, it will bring you happiness because you'll lose your existential fear of death. Here's an app you can get, We Croak. And this gives you 5 reminders of death a day. It's a telephone app, and it was written by Hagar Bergwall, and it's a handbook for being temporary. So don't forget the We Croak app, put it on your phones, and lose your existential fear of death. But you might say, does ignoring death have consequences for us? Well, the person to ask there really is the Dalai Lama. And in his book, Mind of Clear Light, Advice on Dying, he pointed out that those who reject death suffer from a false sense of permanence, become more greedy, more self-serving and lustful, have more enemies, become attached to my wealth, my health, my friends, my enemies, and my family. So in other words, it's a very inward-looking group of people. We have nothing to learn that death is nothing to, we have to learn that death is nothing to fear So if there's one thing which you take away from this talk, it's that death is nothing to fear, but it is about transcendence and expansion of consciousness. So that's a very different way of looking at death. And so this talk is not about the physical phenomena of the dying body. It is about the mental states of the dying, what the dying may expect, and what they could learn to help the process go more smoothly. So keep in mind then that death is an expansion. In our culture, we fear death and shut it out by not discussing it. Ever gone to a party and said to somebody, "Where do you think you'll be buried?" They will quickly find somebody else to talk to. We still do not understand and have just started to study the subjective process of dying. There are very few studies of phenomena surrounding the time of death. In fact, when I started this in 2002, you could become a world authority because there were only 2 papers to read. It really hadn't been looked at properly. There is uncertainty about whether such phenomena are spiritual or organic in origin, but in any case, does it matter? I don't think it does. But many carers feel that lack of training is how to respond when told about these phenomena. And in fact, we've done a leaflet for the carers. So what are these phenomena? Well, it's nice and simple, really. Premonitions that you're going to die. Got some lovely premonitions. A guy who packed up all his, was packing up his house. He's got 2 children and a wife. And he said to his wife that he wasn't going to be with her for long. But 6 months later, he was still there. And then he took an aeroplane ride in Africa, which crashed, and he was killed. So premonitions of various types, they can be very short. Like a woman who felt that her daughter had died in the night. The daughter was in bed beside her, so that was okay. But the next day, she found that her daughter was struck down by a car and killed. Then we come to deathbed visions. Enjoy your deathbed visions. They usually consist of family members. They will appear outside your room, inside your room, and they will, in fact, interact with you. Then something really interesting happens, the new reality. What's the new reality? It's full of light and love and spiritual beings. And they say they're there to help you in the transition. And so what they say is you go on your journey, you go into this new reality, then you go back to the hospice, into this new reality and back to the hospice. So it's really interesting. Terminal lucidity is interesting too. But much more for neuroscientists, because just before you die, you become aware of what's going on around you. And it is, in fact, a time when you can say goodbye to your relatives, even though you've been in coma for 3 months before. And so you understand things. There are now 2 scientific studies going on this. He looks a bit grim, doesn't he? Do you think we ought to change him? Because there's nothing about the Grim Reaper now. What about that guy? Now, deathbed coincidences are fascinating. It's when the dying person goes to look at or appear to somebody in a vision, usually at the moment of death. And we got a number of these, always within half an hour of death, but usually within 5 minutes of death. And so they're certainly interesting. And we're just researching now what it is that leads the dying person to the other one. And I think if any of you know HeartMath, there is some evidence that you get a coincidence of heart rhythms in people who know each other well. So it's going to be something along those lines. Now, here we have clocks which stop. My grandfather's clock stopped, dead, never to go again. You probably remember that one, an American writer who had the story in a Yorkshire pub. Animals howl, bells ring, alarms go off. Light, there's light in the room, either in a transcendence appearance of the dying person, or they look like little physical lights. People see shapes leaving the body, and their presence is in the room, and then you go on your journey. Here's one paper which was published in 2016 by Wolian, Seeing the Light, End-of-Life Experiences, Visions, and Energy Surges, and Other Deathbed Phenomena. It's worth getting, and the reference is there. But what he says is that before much of the dying process can be deep spiritual experiences. The last hours of life are not easily explained within a traditional medical model. The most consistent caregivers, nurses, assess, recognize, and validate such experiences. And he's absolutely right. So don't think on death as a ending or a locking out of consciousness, because it seems not to be. Alan Kelleher, who was a professor of palliative care in the UK, in 2014, wrote this book of his, The Inner Life of the Dying Person. And in it, he says, we can also, as we die, feel courage, love, hope, reminiscence, transcendence, transformation, and even happiness as we die. So it looks as if the dying process actually is something rather different from what we've been thinking. I'd like to direct your attention to another book, that by Monica Rentz. Monica Rentz is a palliative care physician, and we'll hear more from her in a moment, in Switzerland. And her book is Spiritual Experiences in Severe Distress, Illness, and in Dying. So transcendence is really common throughout all these states. We wrote a book. We had hundreds of experiences sent to us. Actually, it's 1,000, 1,500. And we made a book of these, which we called The Art of Dying. And in fact, The Art of Dying was wrongly named. It should have been a new Ars Moriendi Bene, so The Art of Dying Well. And the idea of an Ars Moriendi came from the time of the Great Plague in England, when there weren't enough priests to go around. We got this brochure, Nearing the End of Life, which has been funded for us by the AIM Foundation. And if any of you want it, I can send you a PDF copy. So, end-of-life experiences, we call ELLIes. It's terminal. You get the diagnosis, you're going to die. You start the dying process. You're usually unprepared. How many talks like this will you have gone to? How many times will you have thought about death? Very few. And this, of course, is called Freud's paradox. And Freud's paradox is the fact that you're very happy to talk about other people's death, but never your own. So we set out to find the natures of ELLIes. We interviewed carers of the dying, starting in 2003. We did a 5-year retrospective and a 1-year prospective study, England, Holland, Ireland, questioned the carers, 1 palliative care team, 3 Dutch hospices, etc. And we got over 1,500 100 email accounts from the public. Now, the interesting thing about this is that when we went to the ethics committee and said we wanted to talk to the dying, they said, I don't think so, because I don't think the dying are ready for it, which in a sense was correct because there's very little known about it. But you can do a carer study, and that's what we did. And that was brilliant because it's the carers really that have all the information. So the present consensus is about 90% of those dying consciously will have an end-of-life experience. So you'll probably get one. Here's an example. I joined my daughter after an hour at the hospital, and we both sat chatting to my mother. She spoke to me about my life, my future, all interspersed with references to these people who are now at the end of her bed. She told us that she wouldn't be there the next day, as these people would pick her up when she fell and take her on a journey. I was slightly spooked at her comments, but she's totally at ease. She insisted that we shouldn't cry when she died. With the deathbed visitors often sit on the bed. Why on earth do they sit on the bed? Well, any of you who've had sick children know exactly why they sit on the bed. They sit on the bed because it's very comforting to the person, and it's very comforting for the dying to have a deathbed visitor sitting on it. So who are the visitors? We took 102 people with 118 deathbed visions, and it felt something like this. A quarter saw their parents, 17% spiritual beings, those are, and it's very culture dependent, that because in the Bible Belt of America, many, many angels and spiritual beings are seen, but in our group it was 17%. Sometimes people, when they get a deathbed visitor, they hold out their hands and so on, but they don't have speech. Other relatives is all 14%, spouses, siblings, 9%, grandparents. That's a pity, being a grandparent myself. But only 3% of grandparents come back to their grandchildren. Angels, as I said, are culture dependent, and friends. Now, you will have noticed that there are no cats or dogs there. Are they ever seen? Yes, they are. Often, no. One person gave a lovely account of having seen all the dogs of his life coming over the field to meet him. Yeah, I thought it was going to be my mum. He's quite right, of course. It is going to be his mum. So let's talk about moving to a new reality, which is where you're starting to become non-dual. This is a 32-year-old woman dying of breast cancer. In her last 3 days, she was conscious of a dark roof over her head, bright light. She moved into a waiting place where beings were talking to her, there to help her. Everything will be okay. Loving beings, nothing like a dream. Her grandfather was amongst them, and she moved in and out of that area. And that's fairly typical of people who do that. And this new reality is totally fascinating. My father was at my grandfather's bedside, deeply distressed, but my grandfather quietly said to my father, "Don't worry, Leslie, I'm all right. I can see and hear the most beautiful things, and you must not worry." And he quietly died, lucid to the end. So this suggests that dying can be a very spiritual occurrence. Term lucidity, which we've talked about, which the Victorians called lightening up before death. And Sir Henry Halford, in 1893, a long-serving president of the Royal College of Physicians, wrote, "We've all observed the mind clear in an extraordinary manner in the last hours of life. People who have strokes people who are demented can all sit up in bed, recognize their family, and then they will all be dead within, or their hearts will have stopped all within probably 24 hours. If you're interested in terminal lucidity, there's a very nice paper by Michael Nahm and Bruce Grayson in the Journal of Mental Disease. They report 81 cases. And that was really the first paper to take this subject of terminal lucidity seriously. And as I said before, there are 2 studies, scientific studies, now going on in a prospective way. So now we have the thing which looks, the diagram or the cartoon, which looks like this: diagnosis, the journey, and deathbed visitors, and the new reality. And no longer do we have old death standing there. We have an expansion into non-dual consciousness. It's the ego structures which seem to collapse. And of course, you have your deathbed coincidences. You still have your animals, clocks, and lights and shapes seen leaving the body. But the major point is that you, in fact, have non-dual consciousness and you're beginning the transcendent process. So it's transformation of consciousness to death and non-duality. It's experienced by 90% of the dying, very like the NDE world: light, love and compassion, wholeness and feelings of unity, waiting area with spiritual beings, and dead relatives are present. So there's nothing to worry about when you do get the diagnosis. Just remember what you've heard. And here's somebody who lay beside his partner. My life partner died of AIDS-related pneumonia at home in 1991. I spent the last weeks lying beside him at home much of the time. And on 1 or 2 occasions, a look of sheer ecstasy lit up his face as he smiled and looked at something I couldn't see. This is without doubt that's transiting to a new reality. Now, I want to take you through this paper because it's an extremely good one. Fear, pain, denial, and spiritual experience in the dying process. And that is by Monica Rentz. And she is a palliative care physician in Switzerland. And she has done a lot of work with this. Now, if any of you would like Monica Rentz's paper, I have it and can send it to you. So send me an email to, there's my address. You don't have to say, Peter, what a fantastic talk you gave. You can just put in the subject line, Monica Rentz, please. So just put Monica Rentz and I'll send you her paper. She points out that those who are involved in physical care includes more than just giving a response to a patient's spiritual attitude. Spiritual needs, as well as patient's consciousness and communication, are changing during the dying process. Spirituality has to do with an altered connectedness and consciousness. So what you are doing, in fact, is changing your situation, your experience, and it's the ego structures which are dying. In situations of suffering, illness, and dying, individuals often have spiritual experiences of grace and encounters with the transcendent and the divine. This often happens when patients are in a state beyond everyday consciousness. And please remember this: spiritual experiences are powerfully independent of religious attitudes. It actually matters not what you believe when you come up to die. You'll go through the process just like everybody has. So let us examine the metric of dying. And I'm going to use Monica Rentz's classification, dying as a transition. 3 phases in dying: pre-transition, transition, and post-transition. Patients may feel needs, thirsts, for example, need for bonding. Many fear losing control, and they realize that dying is inevitable. Now, this phase you must remember, because you give everything up. You don't hold on to the fact that you have a house. You don't hold on to your bank account. You don't hold on to all those who you have a strong emotional attachment, because you're going through a different process. And patients can be locked in the pre-transition due to denial. I'm not dying. Reactivated traumas. I was pretty horrid on that occasion. Anxiety, struggle, strong attachment, or unresolved family issues. Don't let it all go. And you can be helped by palliative care workers who support you, and release, such as finding meaning, may help the patient to move on. If you realize that you're dying and your consciousness is expanding, it's really helpful. Transition implies the loosening of the ego consciousness, which I've been talking about. Patients typically show physical signs of anxiety and struggle. This is a sort of intermediate as the ego structures collapse. Now you come to the post-transitional state or spiritual opening. The ego is not dominant anymore. It's non-symbolic, it's non-dual consciousness. So you have become, or are becoming, part of the universe, part of the moment. Patients seem to be serene in the state of being beyond anxiety, pain, or powerlessness. Most are unable to speak, but can still hear. They communicate by gestures or single words. Sometimes reconciliation, vision, and peace are observed. Such transformative experiences may be comparable to a spiritual awakening or a patient who's completed the journey. So it's very important that in this last phase, you realize that your consciousness is expanding. One of our patients, suddenly she stared intently out the window. This lasted only a minute, but it seemed ages. She suddenly turned to me and said, "Please, Pauline, don't ever be afraid of dying. I've seen a most beautiful light and I was going towards it. I wanted to go into that light. It was so peaceful. I really had to fight to come back. Sadly, she died the next morning, but I knew she had seen something that day, which gave her comfort and peace when she knows she only had hours to live." And it doesn't matter what you believe. Here's somebody who thought it was just going to be blackness come down, but what she said is that it wasn't. So I just want to show you the study by Monica Renz. It's 80 patient series. It's a very comprehensive study, at least 3 observations a day, rating 4 dimensions: fear, pain, denial, and spiritual experience. From those, she determined the transition level. And here's an example. Pre-transition, you can see, is up at the top here. This one. Then they dip down through transition into post-transition, from which they die. Not everybody's course was like that. Here's somebody who's moving about all the time. But this is when they have their spiritual experiences, even if you go back again to how you were before. But do remember clearing. I want to show you this because it relates to suffering and no suffering. So which group of patients would you think had least suffering? Well, that's not a puzzle, is it? It's this one. And those are those who had near-death experiences. They go through death without any suffering. There's no reason why we shouldn't do that, really. And there are, in fact, other ones. Mystical or spiritual experiences help. Meditators help. And so those are the 3 main bars, but this one I like, and please remember it too. I'm curious about the afterlife. If you're curious about what's coming to you, then you will, in fact, have much less suffering. So be curious, be curious, be curious, clean and be curious. There are end-of-life experiences, so we must teach about them, learn to give up attachments. A number of mental attitudes can help, for example, meditation. And 90% of conscious patients have positive transcendent experiences. So it's enough to look forward to death and be curious. This is just to show you that the NDEs and end of life experiences are very similar. The red bars there are the ones which you get in NDEs. Otherwise, they're almost exactly the same. This is an interesting idea which I put before you, and that is the better understanding of both the psychology and neurobiology of dying by using psychedelics to moderate. And there is a group, the Coma group in Belgium, who are looking at using ketamine. So you go into your hospice, you get to talk about death, and they give you some ketamine and say, well, this is just a taster of what it would be like. So that will be coming on. I'm going to tell you a quick story now about an old friend of mine who had an NDE. His name was Professor Robertson, leader of the Medici Quartet, very talented man, very intelligent. And he had a half-hour operation to repair a tear in his aorta. He was under general anesthetic and unconscious, and his heart was stopped, and his head cooled to prepare his brain for a period of brain oxygen starvation. And in his book, Paul describes very clearly what he experienced. He was, he says, fully aware that he was dying and moving from this state of experience to potential unification of his consciousness with that of the universe. And do listen to what he said. As I lay there waiting, I felt myself die beautifully, ecstatically, transcendently. I saw eternity and shed the whole of myself joyfully in order to become unified with it. So why did he come back? Really, because his family pulled him back. And when he actually died 3 years ago, his wife and family were with him. And this time they were prepared and they let him go. His wife said, just as he's dying, Paul woke up slightly from a deep sleep and told me, I must let Peter Fenwick know that there is nothing new. We've all been there before. So it looks as if these ideas that we're talking about are correct. The final transition, the crumbling of the ego, subject-object consciousness transforms to non-dual consciousness, and all is a divine unity. As I lay there waiting, I felt myself die beautifully, ecstatically, transcendently. I saw eternity and shed the whole of myself joyfully in order to become unified with it. Well, good luck. I hope that happens to you. If it does, excellent. So what are you afraid of? Interesting. I'd like to thank my co-workers on this who did the in-hospice interviews. So thank you very much for your attention. And there's my email address. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Fenwick. You do have a few more minutes if you have any postscript you'd like to add before we start the question and answer period.
Yes, I think the important thing about it is that make sure that you're fully prepared. You'd never go to Switzerland, that lovely picture behind you, Yvonne, without getting a map of how to get around and wondering what language they spoke. So this is equally true of when you're going into this new transcendent reality. When you, in fact, have got to give up everything, you can practice giving up everything. Some of the greatest mystics, in fact, have achieved it by lying on their bed and imagining they're dying and falling into death and giving up everything. So you can do it that way. But I would recommend that you have to remember just three things. First thing is that you need to clear yourself of attachments. Secondly, that it's an expansion. And thirdly, that it's nothing to be frightened of. Welcome it, and you'll be fine. That's all.
Thank you, Dr. Fenwick. That was profound and beautiful and inspiring. What an awesome presentation. So we have a number of questions, and Danielle asks, what happens when someone is on high doses of morphine when they die?
Oh, brilliant question. Brilliant question. It's exactly what's happening now. Should we die drugged or die undrugged? If you had asked me, I would have said it's better to die undrugged. Would I really? With all these people in pain, needing morphine. But it looks as if it actually does matter. And this is some research work which we're doing at the moment with random number generators. And these generators come out of randomness with changes in consciousness. And it looks as if the changes in consciousness are different if you die with drugs and if you don't. But otherwise, I don't know more than that, really. It's a good question. I'd like to know the answer.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for that. We have another sort of, it's a half question, half comment from Karen, who said, I have had a dying person tell me that they were hearing the voices of the loved ones at their bedside rather than seeing them.
Absolutely right. They can appear anyway. Sometimes they appear outside the hospice, sometimes in the corridor, sometimes in the door, sometimes you just hear them. And that's absolutely right. But they, as the dying person, you will know that their presence is there. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, nice comment.
Mm-hmm. We have another question. And this person would say, what do you mean by non-dual consciousness? They don't understand that concept.
Yes. Okay. Read Jeffrey Martin's book, The Finders. Jeffrey Martin, The Finders. Make a note of it. Jeffrey Martin is in California, and he has developed a method of elevating people's conscious states. And what happens when you do that is you go through a series of locations. He doesn't call them levels. And each location is linked to differences in experience and behavior. But the main thing about it is why they're called non-dual is that the ego structures collapse and you are left with just being one with the universe. And being one with the universe makes you feel very happy and very comfortable. And so if you can become non-dual, that's really excellent. And there are some nice courses which Jeffrey runs, which allows you to become non-dual. And many of your people here may be non-dual, particularly those who have had near-death experiences. And they will know that if they scratch down deep into themselves, everything's okay, no problems. So thank you.
Thank you. That's wonderful. We have a question here from Faith, who says, is the book, The Art of Dying, the best resource for families that are facing losing a loved one? I am looking for something simple to recommend.
Of course, I recommend it. It's an extremely good book. If you want to talk to relatives, we've written a pamphlet for relatives. And so if you send me a request for the pamphlet, I'll send it to you, the PDF. Otherwise, I think Kelleher's book is a very good book, the one I mentioned, so you can get that off the video. And I think it was 2014, so it's relatively modern. But the whole idea of using ketamine, I think, is enormously interesting to give people an idea of what's coming up.
That's an interesting concept, isn't it?
It really is.
We have a question here from Santu. We have lots of questions. When Paul said we have all been there before, do you think he was referring to past lives or referring to the parallel existence of heaven and earth through our intents, through our thoughts?
Yeah. I'll tell you what I think he meant. We'd had long discussions before that about him dying in his NDE, cooled brain, heart stopped, and when he in fact shed his body. And so that was something which was common between us. And I think that we've all been there before, in a sense, would suggest that that was what he was going through again, possibly either for a second time or, if you like it, multiple lives. I don't know which.
Could be interpreted various ways. Julianne says, can you go back to the story of the lady that did not believe in the afterlife when she died?
Yes, I skipped that one a bit. Remember, I said that dying is independent of religious belief. Dying, I'll expand and say, is independent of belief. You can die and believe you will become a hermit crab, but you won't. You can die and you'll become transcendent, and that's correct. It's because of the process of dying. So the woman who didn't believe anything, as she came to her dying process, she dipped down into transcendence, which she liked very much. She's very happy with that. Get on with it, she was saying. Take me. None of this, I don't believe in this. It doesn't occur, etc. She knew it did because she had these experiences. So it's important. We'll all get them.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. The next question relates to that a little bit. Cindy says, when I hear one with the universe, it kind of scares me, like I won't be myself.
Yes and no. The no bit is you won't have your present egoic structures, but you, as an independent person, will still be there. When you join the universe, you shed everything about you, really, except your transcendent character. So frightening? No. It's a massive expansion of consciousness. Come on, it's a delight.
Wonderful. Bill has a couple questions here. He says, can you project or let the pain go? When I would write to Norman Cousins, he would reply, the role of laughter in the process of understanding the body in contrast to the spirit. Is this a way of finding a way to be released into the other state?
Not sure that I can answer that. I haven't thought much about the role of laughter. No, can't help.
Can't help. All right, let's scroll down to the next question. All right, let me just put myself back up here. So Lalia says, my father studied non-local consciousness back in the 1970s. And by the time he died in 2016, he'd read thousands of NDE accounts. He introduced them to me and my sisters, so we studied with him for the last 10 years of his life. He prepared us for his death when he was 83 and left on his own terms when he was 93. I feel so blessed to have been, I feel so blessed to have had that preparation so that when he actually went, I got to spend time with his body before calling the coroner. Unfortunately, most Americans are not ready to hear that my dad took his life when he was ready to go home. He had the blessing to go home with all of his family. What an amazing experience this gave us. Do you have any comment about that?
Oh, yes, indeed. I think it's worth remembering too, apart from the clearing and being curious, etc., is to let stay with the body. And there is a time when the person is quite clearly in the body, and then there's a time when it's an empty casket. And that's the time that you can leave it. Now, if you die in hospital, this is actually quite difficult because there are nurses coming along wanting to take you away to the mortuary. And it isn't accepted that bodies should be taken away after a little while, because quite often, I don't know, you have a 4-bedded ward or an 8-bedded ward, and having somebody dead in the ward is not a very good advertisement for the other patients. So they try to take the body away quickly. But if you can prevent it, do, and wait until it's empty, and then they can take it away. And how do you know? You know.
Thank you. We have another question from Christina. Christina says, my impression is that many U.S. medical centers drug dying people who are not in pain because of the medical staff's fear of death. Many people write in advance directives that they do not want to die in pain, and that is used as a justification to give them medications. Are there ways to educate more people?
Yes, it's talks like these, I think, are one way, because I hope that you'll all go back and won't be afraid and will help people who are dying. I think it's just getting it into general knowledge, really. I attached to a hospice in Scotland, and there, of course, everybody knows about end-of-life experiences. Everybody knows about what the dying process is. So it's not terribly difficult to teach. And so one of my co-workers, Sue Brain, and that's Bryane, she has written a book on death, which might be helpful to people.
I actually have a question that I'm going to ask next. I'll be talking this afternoon about one of my near-death experiences when I was clinically dead for a period of time. And I believe that I had an end-of-life experience before I died. It started 2 hours before I died. It was like seeing visions of spirits on the other side and feeling like I was home and entering non-dual consciousness. But I had no idea I was about to have an accident and die. But then I did, and I was dead. But as I'll be discussing later on, then I had the choice to come back, and I did. Have you heard other stories of people having an end-of-life experience before a near-death experience when they died, like flatlined, and then came back? Have you heard this before?
It's very unusual. I've got occasional accounts like that. It's premonitions of what's coming. And we've got premonitions of death. There are a number of those. But yours is a particularly interesting one because it contains a life review in it as well. Mm-hmm. And in fact, you can, when you're dying, get a life review. Again, it's not common. So I think only the best people get experiences like that.
Well, bless you for saying that, Dr. Fenwick. Anyway, we seem to be at the end of the questions. A couple people are asking the name of the book that you recommended and the name of the author again, the last book that you recommended.
Which one was that?
Sue Brain.
Oh, Sue Brain, yes. Death. It may be death and something or something and death, but we always knew it was her D book.
Her D book. And with that, we do have another question that I'm going to ask since we still have some time. Ann Archer is asking, let me see, where did her question go? it scrolled away for me. Dr. Fenwick, I love the concept of making death a part of daily conversation so it is no longer anticipated in a negative way. How do you suggest we embrace this more fully in our society? How do we bring up talking about the concept of death?
Yes. Well, we've been thinking a lot about this, because what we don't want is adults to still have their existential fear of death. And if you take the Bhutan example, 5 reminders a day, so you can all get the app We Croak. But you start in school, don't you? When the guinea pig dies, or when the fox comes in and bites off the head of the hamster. All these things are wonderful opportunities to talk about death. And then the family die, your grandmother dies. Where's grandmother going? And you can then explain the process. But we should talk about it all the time. We don't. To go to a school and talk about death is really quite a difficult thing to do, because they've all got existential fear of death. You want to come talk to our kids about death? Well, that's really kind. Oh, damn, our lecture panel is full. So it's something which we tend to reject. But once we realize that this enormous rejection of death is something which is absolutely normal, absolutely natural, very much part of us, then we can give it up easily. Because in fact, the fear is a fake fear. It's not a real fear. It's generated by this component of death and the dying that we think. And if you ask people why they're so afraid of death, they will say, well, you go into unconsciousness, don't you? It's all black, isn't it? I'm very frightened of what might happen. I don't want to leave everybody. Do you see? These are all the reasons for having a painful, anxious death. Don't do it. Let everything go and go into the transcendent. Perfect.
Some of us look forward to it.
Yes. One of the things you mentioned was that you had a near-death experience. And so my question to you is, are you non-dual?
Sometimes.
Yeah, because
that is the honest answer. Yeah, when I meditate, I can be non-dual, but when I'm in the world, it's in and out.
Yes, I've found there's a number of people that have had near-death experiences, and once I realized that this is a question you must ask everybody, a number of them have flipped into non-duality.
Isn't that wonderful? Wonderful, wonderful. We have a couple more questions, so since we have time, I'm going to ask them. Ken asks, since we are all souls and incarnate in our current human lives to learn, isn't experiencing fear, apprehension about death part of what we're here to learn about? Like from meetings like this. And
there should be more of them.
Yes. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, my comments on that. I would think that it's certainly one of the things we've got to learn. Mm-hmm. We've got to learn not to hold our egoic structures at such a high value that we paralyze ourselves. I mean, that judge's story was amazing, 9 times. And they were judges, for heaven's sake. The only thing was, in fact, existential fear of death. But do read that book, because it gives you a very good picture of what it means. Mm-hmm. We're transformed by it.
All right. And we have another question. I don't really understand the question, but maybe you will. It's from Bill. He says, do you place the subjective on one side and the objective on the other? What about the ability to integrate?
Well, the ability to integrate, of course, is non-duality. And you integrate non-duality by giving up, or by the egoic components falling away. They fall away at death, and they fall away in people after near-death experiences. So if you see an outside world which is independent of you, then you're not non-dual. If you see an outside world, which is an outside world, which is all there is, and there's no question of looking at it, then you're non-dual.
All righty. I think we're going to go with the final question now. And that was a short question. Santu wants to know, which book talks about the judge's study?
Oh, that's the apple core one.
Yeah, that's one we're trying to get to. There we go. The worm at the core.
Core, yeah. Or on the role of death in life. Financial Times thinks it's provocative, lucid, and fascinating. And Sheldon Solomon is the first author.
All right. Thank you so much. We have one last thing to tell us a bit more about that book about croaking, about being temporary. What exactly is that book about?
It's about reminders every day that you're going to die. And do get the app. It's quite fun. They're very good. There are brilliant sayings about death from most of the world's philosophers. And it just reminds you you're going to die. But when you open your wheat croak to look at it, watch yourself. And if there is even a flicker of anxiety, you know you're not there.
Well, I would say you demonstrate the value of humor in facing death with your incredible sense of humor. So thank you so much, Dr. Fenwick. That was an absolutely profound, beautiful, and very important presentation. And I thank you once again for your really pioneering and groundbreaking work studying death and the end-of-life experience. So thank you for presenting to us today.
Okay, and thank you very much, Yvonne, and thank you all for coming and listening. I hope you found it helpful.